Morning, Mosaic. Before I get into our message this morning, I just wanted to kind of just key us in as a church into really what is the next 10 weeks, which we've been talking about and longing for a very, very long time. And some of you are laughing, and you've only been here a year or so. You haven't been here 5 years, and we've been talking about it. We as a church are only like 12 or 13 years old. We've spent 11 of those on this campus, and we've grown from a nice little bundle of a few baker's dozens and to the rabble that you lot are today. And we have grown in the way in which God is good and kind, and He brings life to something that's healthy, and because it reflects His desire that He's going to do something powerful and profound for this town, because He's a God who knows how to love and serve something into life. He is about transformation again and again and again. And so He's gathering people, He's saving people, He's adding them, He's equipping them and gifting them. And we've done that from this home. This has been our home for this time. But all the way in the background, we've been working and praying and planning around what it is to own our own home and to move into that home. And in 10 weeks' time, we're going to be doing that. In 10 weeks' time, we will be opening our home for the mission over on Stroudley Road, which is opposite Basingstoke Tip. It's a wonderful image of where we are and what we're about. And so on the Easter Sunday, which is the 20th of April, there is no better Sunday for us to have a celebration. Resurrection Sunday, the day of our Lord, who was won the greatest victory of all over Satan, sin, and death. We get to say this is our high day in the whole year, and we get to open our building and celebrate an illustration of God's faithfulness and His ambition for the town. And so I just want that in your diary. I want you to know there's an actual date. If you've ever been in a car with kids, they'll always be asking, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Are we there yet? We're there. We're there, guys. We're there. And so we just want to give God a round of applause and just say, praise God. And I think we just want to take these next few weeks to really tune in. Paul's word has been so helpful to us. Do thank Paul Loader for it's God's kind, because he speaks words to us at the times that we need. And one of his word through Paul was about that we've been in we had a first part to the play, the performance, with the orchestra in that, and then there's been this interval, a long interval, but now the orchestra is tuning up, ready for the second part of the play, and that God is tuning us up. And in this season, it feels as though, like with Ian's word, we're not just moving from Tuesday to Wednesday, we're moving from a caterpillar to a butterfly. There's that level of transformation, there's that level of newness going on, that we want to tune in to what God is saying and to engage in such a way that we realize we're part of this. Not just we corporately, but we individually are part of this, and a sense of what God is saying to us. And so this next season, we're going to be preaching from Hebrews 11 about the people of faith. And we're going to be pressing in repeatedly again and again into those great stories, because we will find that God speaks to us about our stories in there as well. And so we just wanted to be in that place of engaging in faith over that. We also wanted just to create events and moments where we get to see and embody the joy of what it is to be in that place. And so we're going to have some tours around that place. And it isn't just to go see some plaster on a wall and see whether you like the paint. It's to get in the space where you say, this is what's going to happen here. I can see what's happening in this room. This room's going to do what? That's where this is happening. And to get a sense of scale and size and purpose, we're going to want to go in and worship in that space. It's not just to tour and walk around and admire the color and the finish and the art, the work, but it is to stand in that place and consecrate it for the glory of God. Because it has been many things before, but now it's a house of worship. And so we want to do that together as a body. And so we're creating 2 moments for that, the 11th and 15th of February, where we're saying we're creating 2 moments because people like options. But one is an evening and one's a Saturday morning, but an opportunity for us as a body to get there, to worship together, to dream together, to walk the space and the ground and to pray and say, God, what would you do here? What will you do for the generations that are going to be blessed after us? What seeds are we sowing that will be reaped many generations later that we are praying for now? What are we hoping for, longing for? We want to get in that space and pray and praise and celebrate and prophesy and hear from God for ourselves. And so we want to do that together as well. But we've also got the practicality of moving into a home, is that we could really do with a lot of help with within the half-term week, where if you were able to give up a morning or a day to come on site, and we've got chairs to clean, we've got furniture to erect, we've got things to, not the building to paint, but we've got bits of furniture that need restoring and bringing up to measure. There's a whole load of jobs inside and outside the building. If we could come together during that half-term week, and a few of us turning up each day just to sort of knock out some of the jobs, that's really going to enable us to be ready to open our home on the 20th of April. And so we wanted to give you good notice about that. And then finally, we've just talked about this a bit recently, is what it is to resource the mission, to make sure that the mission is resourced well for what we're doing. Because if God is bringing us into this place, into this building at this time, we want to see that resourced well. And so what does it mean to open it well? It's one of the things of opening a home is that you get in and it's going to be a bit sparse. It's going to be a bit, you'll open a room and you go, well, that's a room full of potential because there's not much in it. And we'll be moving into our building and we'll grow into it. But there's a sense of what does it mean to resource our mission? So we're announcing just over that season, but 3 particular Sundays where we're wanting to go to God and say, as it says in Corinthians, Lord, what would you have me give? Yeah, I've got my time and my talents and my treasures. I'm subject to all of you, Lord. You are Lord of all. What would you have me give in this moment and this time? And so we're just creating opportunity again for us to say, Lord, how would you have me respond? And what would you ask of me? And it says in Corinthians about that joyful act of worship, that joyful thing that you talk to him in relationship and you hear from him and you give what you've decided to give, and it from a place of joy and no coercion, their sense of I'm on this mission with you in every single way possible. And so as we're tuning into what God is doing, we've got these moments across the next few weeks. And so next week when you arrive, you'll have a handout on your chair, and it will really detail all of that a lot more, and a real sense of where we're going and all the opportunities for us to sort of play our part, but also tune in. And so just wanted to let you guys know that we're finally arrived and we're good to go. So wonderful, wonderful. Crunching gear change, always. Right, I'm going to preach. I want to ask the question, is it possible to reverse a declining culture? Is it possible for us to see the society that we live within reversed? And as people of faith, I know your first reaction is yes. I know your first reaction is yes, because he's been doing it forever. He's been doing it since Adam and Eve. He's been doing it generation after generation. He's been doing it again and again because that is his commitment, that he will love us into wholeness and he will come on a mission to rescue every single one that would receive his free gift of life. He is a God of transformation, but it's the question that still has to be owned by us personally. Is it possible to reverse a declining culture? Because we live within a moment which feels like a decline. It feels like a challenge. And I want us to wrestle with that and own that question and engage with it in a way that is personal for us, knowing that who we are and how we've been placed and called in this time to live faithfully for the glory of God. 100 years ago, there was a great debate around this very question. Is it possible to reverse a declining culture? And there was a whole swathe of people that said, no chance. When you find yourself in a society like that, that's declining, that's losing its values, it's losing its ways, it's on the wane, your best thing to do is go to the beach. The best thing is to go to the beach, enjoy the days you've got, and make the most of what you've got. But Arnold Toynbee disagreed with this and wrote the largest book of history that's ever been written. He wrote 12 volumes and pretty much surveyed every civilization that's been created and found this to be true. He said, there is something spiritual about civilizations and cultures that means there's always a chance of rebirth. God is about the business of rebirth and resurrection. And he said, the groups that cause these rebirths, and this is where our ownership comes in here, they're the groups of creative minorities. They're the people like you and me, the people on the margins, the people that are seeing the drift away from God and saying, God, we will be those people. And so he would say there's always the chance of rebirth, and it's those that creative minorities that cause that rebirth. And so if we were to ask that question again, is it possible to reverse a decline in culture? We've seen that happen again and again. We give it labels, names. We call it the Great Awakening, revivals. We call it the moral revolutions. We see these things happen. History it tells us. But if we were to go back 200 years, in the 1840s, Britain is suffering a period of darkness and despair and poverty. Queen Victoria has just survived an assassination attempt in Hyde Park. And there is real revolution in the air. And this talk of revolution is brewing. And on the night before the revolution is going to gather, and it feels like this is going to be when the moment sparks into life, the great British weather does this, and rains and rains and rains and rains and rains to the point that people can't get out. And the moment is lost, and they don't get to gather, and the moment doesn't ignite like it can do. And historians tell us that as that potential revolution died, a new revolution rose up in its place. But one that's not particularly spoken about. If you've seen this program on BBC called Revolution of the Do-Gooders by Ian Hislop, you'll get a chance to see what we're talking about in a bit more depth. Go watch it. But the Revolution of the Do-Gooders was a moral revolution in the 19th century that was driven by a group of people who sought to improve society. They saw where it was going and saw what God wanted for that society and thought, how can we get there? The movement was marked by a number of campaigns, the abolition of slavery, the creation of social housing. And it caused many men and women to stand up and say, I'm going to speak, I'm going to lead, I'm going to take personal responsibility in a way that it's going to cost me, but it's not about me. It's about God. And this revolution was marked across the board. Artists and authors and politicians and scientists and thinkers all starting to ask the question at the same time, because God asks that question of each of us, what can I do to serve? Rather than my own achievement, what can I do to contribute to the improvement of my nation? And it changed this nation at that time. And what came out and through this time was known as a gospel movement, the Great Awakening. And our prayer as a people here right now, and has been through the generation, is your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We know that God is in the business of restoration and transformation because he says this is the prayer that you should be praying. Is it possible to reverse a decline in culture? Yes. Even in our cultural moment, where it feels like traditional Christian faith increasingly has opposition. Whether it's identity that's being redefined, where individual feelings now define selfhood, where that clashes with Christian truths about the created order as God tells us. Or the sexual revolution, the biblical teachings on gender and sexuality being dismissed as oppressive. Or relativism's rise, where absolute truths are rejected and undermines the gospel authority. Or institutionalized secularism, where education, media, law increasingly margin Christian perspectives. Or maybe it's the individualization of the society, where communities are becoming even harder to build and people are suffering with greater degrees of isolation, loneliness, and mental health issues. Or whether it's the social marginalization we experience, because our public expression of faith often incurs professional and personal costs. We're in a cultural moment where we might say, this is tough. This isn't easy. This isn't downhill. This is uphill. But people, this is when we've been called to live. Church, this is when God said, I want this group of people here and now for this time and this season. He chose you to live now because he knew that the season was this and it would need us empowered by his Spirit to live out faithfully. And so you're not here by accident and you aren't here without power. You're in this moment and this time to bring transformation. Not because we're great, not because we're clever, not because we've got it sorted, but because he's faithful. And he uses people like you and me. And so he is wonderful. And he calls us to live in this moment. But we are in a moment where it's becoming increasingly difficult for churches to even hire a venue, even to turn up on a Sunday. I've got friends within the church group of churches that I look after that are struggling to find a church to hire on a Sunday. They've been asked to leave their current place and they've got weeks to find somewhere new. And they can't find anywhere. And I'm not necessarily sure of all the reasons why. Some of it will be it's just too much effort and bureaucracy. Some of it will be we don't want a church. It doesn't comply with some of our policies. We will have different reasons, but that it is increasingly, in the climate of our environment and our culture, increasingly going to be difficult for churches to hire venues, to find a place to gather publicly. It's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that God has given us a home. Because it's a secure home from which we can build and preach and not wonder if anyone's going to say, bye-bye, you said the wrong thing. You didn't agree with our policy that we've written over here. No, we want to be able to say, no, we are secure. But it's in this moment that we've been called to live faithfully. And Christians are called to live courageously and counterculturally at all times. But we're asked to understand the times we live in. Not just critique them, but to know them and to appreciate them and understand how does God want to speak life into them. Not moan about the moment we're in, but to speak life into it. Bearing witness to truth with love and humility. And so I just wanted us to pause for a moment and ask yourself, where are you personally bumping up against the culture around you? And where are you seeing God say, bring that kingdom culture here? Where are you finding that, whether it's the workplace, there's a culture of gossip, or there's an environment where, wow, bend the rules, it's fine. Well, that's a guidance, it's not a rule, it's not a law. You're being invited to break with your conscience, or you're in an environment where there's family disunity and it's broken. And you know that God wants to see a restored family. Or you find that place where you know, that's the challenge for me. That's the thing that I'm looking for. Whether it's the workplace, the family, the community in which you've been set. You might be surrounded by injustices. And you think, how on earth are we going to do that? It was only a few months ago that our nation reminded us that we are inherently racist in so many different ways. We thought we'd kind of kicked it into touch. The football hooliganism of the 80s kind of suddenly flushed up to the surface again, and it was on the streets burning things. We as a nation looked at that and said, we've got so much work to do. There is so much brokenness in our own hearts that we can't even see each other with equal value, dignity, and worth. There's so much for us to do. So in this moment, where are you bumping up against something in culture that you say, I need to bring God's kingdom here? Like the do-gooders before us, how can you serve from your place of influence for the healing of this nation? Because Jesus' call upon us is this, to understand the cultural moment we're in, to grasp the philosophical and historical roots of where we're at and navigate it with truth and speak truth into this moment. He would call for us to commit to robust church community where we would have strong, supportive community from which to live our faith out and pass it on to the next generation. He would call for us to live faithfully rather than conforming to the cultural pressures around us. Bear witness to the truth with humility, courage, and love. And he would call us to recover historical wisdom, drawing from historical Christian teachings and practices so that we have a stable foundation in an age of flux. He would call these things of us. So we come back to that question, is it possible to reverse the decline in culture? Yes, because Jesus is all about that business from day one. But it's going to require courage. The respond for you to respond to that call is a virtue that is needed in every hour, in every situation, and it is the virtue of courage. And the Bible bears witness to this in times of turbulence, times transition and change. There is a repeated and concerted exhortation to God's people as a whole, and as to individuals in particular, be strong and courageous. The scriptures remind us again and again, be strong and courageous. The reason we're told it is because we want to be the opposite. We feel the absolute opposite. We feel weak and cowardly. And he says, be strong and courageous. Be strong and courageous. When the people of Israel are about to enter the promised land, Moses says to the people of God in Deuteronomy 31, be strong and courageous. They're about to press into enemy territory and take land. That poses real physical challenge to life. Be strong and courageous. When Moses hands on the baton of leadership to Joshua, what did he say to Joshua? Be strong and courageous. When Moses dies and God commissions Joshua, because he needed to hear it again, what did he say to him 3 times? Be strong and courageous. In Joshua 10, what does Joshua say to the people of God as they are in the conquest into the land of Canaan? Be strong and courageous. In times of transition and turning and turbulence, God's people are exhorted to be strong and courageous because we're going to need to be so. See, today our world and our Basingstoke that we love with all our hearts needs strong and courageous people of God's love and humility that sees a greater vision, that is following someone who is building something beautiful, that wants to help pray it into life and build it into life. Because we've been very clear about what it is, that we want to love Basingstoke into life, and what that means is loving people towards Jesus. When we want to love people into life, it's loving them towards Jesus, leading them to the one that can love them into wholeness. But when we see the need, we're committed to loving Basingstoke until there's no need, when the need is gone. And we're going to keep serving and serving and serving until the need is gone. And so we'll love Basingstoke into life by leading them to Jesus, and then we're going to keep loving the town until the need is gone. That's what he's asked us to do in the climate and the environment that we're in. We will trust the fruit to him, but he's asked us to be faithful. He's asked us to do that in this time, in this season. So what is courage? What's biblical courage? Not Hollywood bravado, but what's biblical courage? See, the definition of courage is the strength of mind to carry on in spite of danger and difficulty. The strength of mind to carry on in spite of danger and difficulty. An author, a guy called Joe Rigney's wrote a little book on courage, adds this greater definition to it. It says, it speaks more to the motive, though. He says, there is a deeper desire, though. Why would you overcome the difficulty and the danger? Because there is a deeper desire for a greater good worthy of the sacrifice. And so we overcome the fear or difficulty in pursuit of it. There is something greater that we're pursuing that means we'll get out of the way of fear. And some of the features of courage are these. The first is that there's always double vision going on. Courage requires us to be able to see 2 things at once. There's going to be a danger out there which wants to produce a fear in here. There's always going to be one of those. We aren't asked to work in a perfect environment. We're asked to work in this environment. And so there's always going to be something out there that wants to cause fear in here. But there's also something good out there that produces a deep desire in here as well. Something we want and something we fear. And this interaction, this internal conflict surrounding those is where courage comes into play. The other thing is courage is a habit. It's not something you switch on or off. It's something you grow into. It's not just now and then, once in a while. It's a habit we cultivate. Because in the nature of courage with God, it's in a relationship that we walk with him, that we develop this relationship with him, that we trust him further and further and more and more. And so he'll ask you to do something small, and you'll trust him for it. And they'll say, that's great. Can we do the next thing? And can we do the next thing? Courage is a habit. But it's a habit in the presence of the Lord. A couple of summers ago, we, as a family, went up to Snowdon, and we went over Crib Goch. All four of the kids were with us. And the little ones, this is a pretty sketchy stretch. And it's pretty scary when you get up there. And it was blowing 40 miles an hour, and you've got sheer drops. And little JJ and Lily are with us. And Emmy and Zane. Emmy's just like, this is wonderful. I've got great reception up here. And she was messaging her friends while I'm telling her, get down, get down. But little JJ's just with me. And we talked about it afterwards. And he said, well, I asked him, he said, were you scared? And he said, yeah, I was really scared, Dad. He said, but I was with you, son, you'll be all right. And you go, that's not a guarantee. That's not a guarantee, son, but it's quite a good illustration. We're going to be afraid again and again. We're going to be asked to do some things that feel pretty terrifying, that feel like I'm out of my depth, and I don't know how this is going to work. But it's not like JJ with me. It's us with God. And so we cultivate that habit because we go with him. And this courage manifests in two different ways. On one hand, courage strains forward for the good that we don't yet have in the face of risk. There's something out there that means that courage strains forward for it, despite there being risk, danger, difficulty, and uncertainty. And we call that daring. There's a courage called daring. And on the other hand, there's a courage that clings to the good. Things that we do have already, but in the face of pain or pressure, we resist the impulse to flee back, to compromise. We call this fortitude. Daring takes the hill that we don't yet have. God asks that courage of us. He will ask it of you. There's a hill for you to go take that doesn't yet exist within his realm of the kingdom. And he would say, go take it, or it has been lost and he wants it back again. He says, I want that. Go take it. So there's a courage that requires us to go and take the hill. And then there's a fortitude that's required to hold the hill that we've taken when the counterattack comes. We need daring and we need fortitude. And I think in our environment, it's helpful to think, God, what are you asking us to dare for? And what are you asking fortitude of? See, as you look at the history of the Christian church, the Jesus followers that have faithfully lived after generation, how have they seen transformation after transformation? It's when we serve the poor. It's when we meet the needs of the hurting. It's when we look after the marginalized, when we look after the lost, the widows, the orphan, those that are foreign and homeless. When we take hold of them and love them and serve them and treat them like brother and sister, when we share with them what we have, so that we lift them up and dignify them, when we change institutions and systems and societies to better become humane and loving, we see the gospel expand. It's happened again and again. It's how the Roman world was turned upside down by the virtue of loving the ones that everyone else was running away from. It's how the revolutions have happened again and again through great men and women of faith, like Cadbury building a whole city called Bourneville and saying, I'm going to house these people with dignity. There's many people like Lancet who wrote, if you're into the medicine, you will know that the Lancet Journal, he started by wanting to expose the sort of the inconsistency and the corruption within the medical world. There's people that have wanted to turn things upside down, create social housing, to create freedoms for people like slavery. You think Wilberforce. You think people that have looked and said, this is wrong, and I need to go take that hill. And then those that have said, we need to now hold that hill. And so we want to take a hill. We want to serve those that are around us. But it isn't just a a social gospel we take. We're not just showing the good of God. We declare the good news of God. We want to love people to life by leading them to Jesus. And so we want to take that hill where we show the gospel and we tell the gospel. We want to faithfully be present. But we also need to be full of fortitude. That means you loving Jesus for who he is in private. Walking out a beautiful walk of faithfulness and holiness. That's fortitude. That's you saying no to sin and yes to Jesus. In the micro decisions, in the decisions and the thoughts of your head and your heart. That's if you're married, loving your spouse more than you love yourself, so that they flourish and thrive. That's loving your children if you have children and investing in them in such a way that you are raising little followers of Christ that live in the good of the gospel and choose it for themselves. It could be that you speak truth into the confusion of our day, but there is many ways in which we are called to have fortitude. What are they for you? Where are you to have daring? And where are you to have fortitude? Because you have a requirement for both in your world. C.S. Lewis says this: courage is not just one of the virtues, it's the form of every virtue at the point of testing. It's the form of every virtue at the point of testing. Your virtues will be tested. Will you have the courage of conviction to stand by them? To stand by the values that Jesus said, this is who I am. This is what I'm like. Be like me. At that moment of testing, be like me. Be a little Christ in that moment. A little follower of Jesus that looks just like me. Under pressure, in that moment, when you're called to compromise, you don't, because I wouldn't. And you're not doing it because you're a little bit better than the next person to you. A little bit more moral, a little stronger, a little bit more self-righteous. You're doing it because I'm empowered by the presence of the Holy Spirit. I'm alive in Christ, and my appetites and my drives and my passions have been renewed, and I long to be like that. And the beauty is, even when we falter, and we will, he's gracious, and he says, that's okay. Let's keep learning. Let's keep going. Let's keep restoring. You're not finished yet. I wouldn't expect you to be perfect. I don't expect you to get it right every time, because we're still working this out. You've barely learned how to walk. I'm not asking you to run just yet. But he's asking us to be that in this here and now. And when we see that kind of courage, it is beautiful. And it's infectious. And so it's so important in our world, in our family here, let our courage be seen. And cheer on courage where you see courage lived out. It's infectious, it's beautiful. We want to live for God with everything we have. But we're not just interested in generic courage. We're interested in biblical courage, Christian courage. The good that we cling to is not a moral ideal, it is God himself. It is Jesus himself that we hold to and cling to and pursue. In the previous passages I read where we were encouraged to be strong and courageous, I left out the key reason why you should be strong and courageous. It isn't because you've got a little bit more internal fortitude, know how to white knuckle it for a little bit longer than those to the left and right. It says, because your Lord God is with you wherever you go. The reason why you can be courageous is the Lord God goes with you everywhere. And so that's why we're courageous. That's why JJ could go over the top of Crib Goch and be courageous, is because I went with him. He wouldn't have done it on his own. And we wouldn't do it on our own if we didn't know the Lord was with us every step of the way. We go being bold and courageous because he is with us. The greater good that subdues our passions of fear that would want to cause us to compromise in the moment of testing is our allegiance to King Jesus. And so let's press into that loving relationships. Let's know him more sweetly and deeply, because from that place we will find our courage to stand at the point of testing, to love Jesus so much that we stand for him joyfully and love the town until the need is gone, and love people so much we point them to Jesus, And we keep doing that despite the environment around us, despite what people think, whether we think we've shot our brains out because we can't believe science if we were Christian, let alone the fact that there's so many scientists in here that does my other scientist friends crazy in the head. They just think, what's going on? How are they Christians if they're scientists? I don't know. I love that we get to fry people's noodles because we are not just one type of people. We're an expression of the whole of this town living it out. We want to live that out in front of them. He is the joy before us and the source of our strength. And so as I close, I just want to bring to us a story from the scriptures that you'll know well. And then I want to rehearse why we have grown in the habit of trusting him courageously and why we can trust him going forward. And it's the story of David and Goliath. There's a great Philistine warrior, a giant towering over the people of God. The scriptures would say he was 9 foot tall. A massive man. Would fit very well in the WWE these days, I reckon. Probably make a good tidy earning there, but an absolute giant of a man. And he stands there not just as a symbol, but he is skilled, he is threatening, he is infamous, and his presence and the way in which he defies the people of God and mocks God himself and challenges them to one-to-one combat causes them to shrink back. It says in 1 Samuel 17:11, King Saul and all of Israel are dismayed and greatly afraid. For them, there was a danger out there that produced a fear in here that caused them to shrink. The passion of fear overwhelmed them and they fled. But in 1 Samuel 17:24, David heard Goliath's mockery and defiance of the living God and recognized the shame that was now upon the people of Israel for allowing that fear to cause them to shrink back. And he's shocked by it, and he sees God's glory and reputation being in tatters by virtue of his people running away. He volunteers to fight on their behalf for God's glory. And he says this, "Let no man's heart fail because of Goliath. Your servant will go and fight this Philistine." And he runs into battle not from it. He's learnt to master fear because he has a deeper desire for a greater good. He saw himself how God sees him. He'd grown up, David, always being the young one, the overlooked one, the insignificant one, the soft poet who just there's not a lot about him. He's not strong. He's not impressive. He's poetic. Oh, who wants a poetic shepherd? There was a derision given to him from his own family, and he had to choose to take that and put that down and pick up. How does God see me? And who is God that I go with? And so he says, I'll go. Let no one's heart fail. He runs into the battle. And Saul tells him, you're foolish. You're unprepared. You're not going to succeed. But David reminds Saul, as a shepherd, he's faced the bear and the lion on multiple occasions. And so this Philistine offers no greater threat because God is with me. He says, I struck down the lion and saved the lamb from its jaws. And it isn't him with bravado saying, I kill bears and lions. I mean, if anyone was here killing bears and lions, I think you would be pretty impressive. You would be probably eating more than 20 wings at Wings Wednesday as well. That's pretty insane. But he didn't say that saying, I'll take a Philistine on because I know how to do combat with fierce animals. It isn't just bravado. He says, it's not my strength. It was not my skill and prowess, but the Lord himself who delivered me from the paw of the bear and the jaw of the lion. This God will deliver me from the hands of this Philistine. God is with me wherever I go. David learned how to step in to courage through loving the sheep that caused him to face the bear and win. And then when a lion had a lamb in its mouth, to go into its jaws and take the lamb out. He went from the bear to the lion and now to Goliath. He grew in his courage. Courage doesn't come out of nowhere. Courage is cultivated in that deep relationship with God. We remember his past faithfulness and trust him for the new challenges. And in this story, before there was Goliath, there was a lion. Before there was a lion, there was a bear. And our relationship and our trust grows in him as we follow him. And we as a church, as a body of individuals, have many stories of following God and his faithfulness. We are not here because of our skill and prowess. We've planned hard, we've worked hard, we've prepared well. But it's been God's provision. See, it was God who enabled us to raise £200,000 in a year when we were a much, much smaller church. It was God who faithfully led us to put a ridiculously low offer in on a building that was worth way, way more. This building will have, at the end of this project, will be worth $1 million or so. We put in an offer of $315,000. We've had to put a lot of money back into that place to renovate it because it was a tip. It was God who protected us when the owners withdrew from the deal at the 11th hour, thinking they were going to get more money elsewhere at an auction. It was God who provided for us when we won the auction for $247,000, 68 less than we'd have previously agreed. It was God who enabled us to get a mortgage when a year ago it looked so unlikely. The environment, the situation, the global economics, our own personal economics, because the building project had gone up 100,000, it just looked like this might not happen. And in God's favor, he enabled us to receive that mortgage. It was God who provided for us when he captured the hearts of our builder and caused him to want to stick with us throughout thick and thin. And they are doing an excellent job down there and a genuine joy to work with. It was God who's given us our home for the mission for such as a time as this. And so if we've trusted him for past faithfulness, what about the new challenges? We've walked with him this far. Now where next? And that's the question that we want to ask ourselves, because these victories weren't won by human strength, but by God's provision. And so when David went to see Goliath, he faced him with 5 smooth stones. He bent down and picked up 5 smooth stones. And like David, we will maintain our courage in the face of fear and danger because we've got a deeper passion, a greater love that spurs us on. See, David doesn't just talk behind closed doors and say, oh yeah, I know, I could definitely do that. There isn't that false bravado behind closed doors. He goes into the heat of the moment and says to Goliath, you come at me with sword and spear, but I come to you with the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you defied. This day, my God will deliver you into my hands. We're called to face giants. We're called to love people towards Jesus. We're called to love this town until the hurt and need is gone. We're not called to be safe, we're called to be courageous. We're called to have the courage of our convictions so that we live faithfully to our decisions, even when it costs us in the workplace, the neighborhood, our friends, our family. We will face challenges in our society, but the risk is worth the reward because every single person that is alive is full of dignity, value, and worth. And Jesus has a claim on them that he wants to see returned. He wants them all to come home. He would long for that and to be reconciled. And he longs through forgiveness of their sin and receiving his righteousness that they would receive that. That's his heart. That's his desire, that he would break the broken record. He would break the cycle of pain and destruction that causes the world to continue to look like it does. We long to see everyone rightly connected to God. And to do that, we must love them with word and deed, with service and humility. So is it possible to see a decline in culture change? Yeah, because God's at work. And we've been asked to serve this nation and this town like Jesus has loved us and served us, with self-sacrificial servant leadership. We need models of joyful sacrifice, glad-hearted, daring, pioneering, risk-taking, courageous fortitude. God has called us to these things, and as we see these models, and as we're empowered by his Spirit, it will strengthen our resolve in this context, in this time, to live faithfully. And in this moment, God has given us a home for the mission. That means he is about to do more. He isn't about to do less. He's going to do more from a place of greater security, our home, that we'll be able to open up the doors to and say, come on in. And a place from which we will go on out the rest of the week and love them into life. So we need courage for today. Basingstoke needs us as believers, not because we're special, but because we're faithful, to step up with bold faith, selfless service, and each of us has a smooth stone. Each of us has an obedience, a gift, a talent, an opportunity to glorify God. And my question, and I hope you've been wondering it throughout, is what is mine? What is your smooth stone? How will you serve your family, your workplace, your community for God's glory? What daring is he asking of you that needs a hill to be taken? What fortitude is required that's going to hold it when attack comes? What's the smooth stone that he's saying, this year, that's yours. That's yours this year. Take it, hold it. This is your smooth stone this year. Because we're called to be courageous, because he's with us wherever we go. And so I just wonder if the band wouldn't mind coming up. And I just would like us for a moment to, standing in that place of worship, respond. I've got a whole bucket full of stones. And as we worship, I would love for each of us to come forward and say, what's my smooth stone? Just put your hand in. Pick one out. But as you do it, don't just imagining you picking up a stone. Please imagine this stone being pressed into your hand by God, saying, here's yours. Here's yours. Because he's asking something of you. And as you come forward, what is it that you're praying for this year? That daring, that fortitude, that act of love, that act of service. How are we going to see this society loved into life? Well, it will be through agents of change like you and me. Because he's asked us to do it. He could do it on his own. He chose to do it with you. By his Spirit, he's empowering us. So as you come forward, come take a stone. And then you'll know what that's for.